looking forward to this for quite some time. And I tell you why I've been looking forward to this is because we do a lot of discussions on death and dying on this platform. And on more than one occasion, I had somebody say, "Hey, you got to get the Get Your Shit Together lady on." And I was like, "Who is this?" So I did some searching around and sent and found Chanel Roberts, who's we won't call her that, but it definitely got my attention. And so I'd love to welcome Chanel Roberts. She's the author of a book, What Matters Most. But um, let me tell you, like her whole story and what she has done is so amazing. So I don't know if Chanel, if you knew that sometimes people refer to you as the Get Your Shit Together lady. But that's what got my attention to track you down. And and I'm so grateful that you've got the time to join us here today and to be able to share your story and the resources that you provide. But but before we dive in, let's get to know you a little bit better. The and tell us your story.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for inviting me to be here. It's wonderful to chat with you and your community of people and the wonderful work that you're doing. And yes, I do have to come up with some crafty ways to introduce myself. At conferences, it's like Chanel Reynolds, nice to meet you. Get your shit together. Or get your shit together, comma, nice to meet you. Um, well, and let me first say that the phrase "get your shit together" and the website that I started over 10 years ago started because the work found me. Um, I found myself in the ER and the ICU about 14 years ago as a younger woman with a 5-year old and a middle school aged stepdaughter, and my late husband had gotten in an accident. And from that moment, I was going to say I got the phone call, but I saw all the missed voicemails on my phone. I was over at a friend's house. My son was with me. People were trying to get a hold of me. I didn't know what hospital to go to. I didn't know how bad it would be when I got there. The words out of my mouth were, "Oh my God, I don't have my shit together." And then the next sentence was, "And if I don't have my shit together, what's going on with everybody else in all these other rooms in the hospital and
Mm,
the ER and the family waiting in the lobby with the kids?" And, it was just uh, eye-opening to me, and also realizing for a native English speaking, legally married, college educated person who lived, and still does in Seattle, that I felt so emotionally devastated. And I also didn't know what else was going to happen. And so I realized that we're not very good at death and dying in this country. And my experience was not. We're not that we haven't been as good at talking about it, although your work and many other people are changing that. Um, and and we don't know what to do, and we don't know where to start. And talking about, estate planning does not bring out generally a lot of passion and enthusiasm in people. But when it comes to talking to your friend over a cup of coffee at the kitchen table and you say, "Oh my God, I don't have my shit together," and they say, "Me either," like that's a touch point that we can all relate to in one way or another, and we can help ourselves and each other make, you know, password management today easier, and then what happens when something happens, to give our future selves and our future family a little bit better protection and some answers in advance. And so that's why Get Your Shit Together, or just if we need to use the clean version, um, came out after an accident. And very quickly, I realized that it's not just my story. We all have a story, or we will one day. And we're looking for opportunities to come together to figure out, how to make all of this stuff a little less scary.
man. Well, Yeah, and folks, I was so nervous. Like I really wanted to promote this discussion as get your shit together, but I know how the email enforcers are, and I would probably be blacklisted on a small percentage of the emails. But will you be prepared if life knocks you sideways? Is really, that's the topic of today. And so um, I got a little sneak peek at the slide deck. Chanel was sort of like, I don't know, should I show a slide deck or not? And I said, well, let me take a look at it. And I think it is wonderful. So what I think, Chanel, if you don't mind, I love the idea of you using your slides to kind of keep our discussion going a little bit, and then take a few breaks and check in with me. And if somebody, if folks, if anybody's got a question or anything like that, I'll kind of jump in and we can get the conversation started there. But I really liked what I saw on your slide deck.
Oh, thank you. And thank you again for inviting me to be here. And if all of you who are here are and watching at home might have guessed, I love having a conversation. So if I start getting into slide presenter mode, hands, ask, whatever might be, there's a number of things to this kind of 360 view of what getting your shit together, I think, can really look like. And we're all going to have different things that resonate more quickly or clearly, and other things that you might say, oh, I already got that stuff done.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I'd love to. So, I'm hoping you all can see my screen. I don't have all the master controls
Yeah,
of the
that
technology.
that looks good. And I think what you did before was you went to page view, I think is what you did.
Let's try that. Oops, let's try.
Single page. There you go.
All right. I'm hoping that that is good or good enough for what we're
Um,
doing today.
yeah, let's see. Do that again. Oh, there we go. Okay, now I think it's single page. Okay, got it.
Great. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Again, I'm Chanel Reynolds, and I started a few different versions of Get Your Shit Together. And the reason is because I, like many of us, have found myself kind of going down the rabbit hole. I got a phone call after long weeks of work. I was with my son, I was at a friend's barbecue, and I went to go pick up my phone because at that point, my son, who was 5, who's now 20, if you can believe it. So I have a whole other host of documents and things to think about, or what if moments. I went to go grab my phone, which was in my purse in the other room. So that also dates the story a little bit because I don't think we leave our phones and purses in the other room anymore. And I noticed I had missed a bunch of calls and gotten a lot of messages from numbers that I didn't recognize. And my first inclination was to drop the phone back in the bag, but I wanted to take a picture of Mikey's kid who was jumping around and being silly on the couch. And it didn't take long to realize after the first message, which was kind of a frantic, people are trying to find you, to Jose, my late husband, was in an accident and they took him. And I was really felt like the earth had been pulled out from underneath me, and I needed to figure out where to go, and I, needed to remember how to drive a car, and all those things we find ourselves when life knocks you sideways. And so I could tell I had no information at all, but could tell by the tone of the voice on the voicemails that it could be bad. So I told my son he was at a surprise sleepover and drove to the wrong hospital because I'm used to going to the one where you go if you get a broken arm at, rugby game. I wasn't used to going to the hospital that the helicopters land on. And when I arrived there, um, first of all, I had to figure out how to park. I was like, how about I just leave the car in the middle of the street and someone will figure it out later? When I arrived, the ER doc said that there was a 50-50 chance. And I had been worried that when I arrived at the ER, I didn't know what room they would take me to. And 50-50 sounded pretty good to me, better than that he wasn't alive, which is what I was afraid of. But then the ER doc kind of leaned in because he could probably tell my eyeballs and my pupils were huge and I was trying to just make sense of words. He said, "No, Chanel, the paramedics thought that he was going to be dead on arrival. He could still die at any minute. If he is stable enough to make it into surgery, there's a 50-50 chance he'll make it off the table." And that's when I realized that no matter what happened next, the life we had was over and everything was going to change. And I didn't know what that was going to look like. And so if and when something happens, it could be a close call. It could be, waiting for a phone call from the doctor to get a diagnosis. It could be rushing to get a plane ticket to fly across the country to be with a family member. We have all of these questions, and these were some of mine. I didn't know what would happen um, if the 50-50 chance was that he would live. I didn't know what would happen next if he did not. And so I had so many questions swarming around in my head. It made it harder, I would say, for me to be in the room when something happened and process just the critical information that I was trying to understand. And so after a week in the ER and then the ICU, the I went from thinking, please do everything possible to keep him alive until I get to the hospital, to after a week of all of the tests saying the same thing, was he'd never regained consciousness, and both his body and his brain were far too damaged. His injuries were unrecoverable. I made the decision based on the planning that we had done in advance, knowing that the quality of life he was, uh, well, they were keeping somebody who was, it was medical intervention at that point rather than medical support. And so I made the decision that I knew he would want, which were the hardest words to get out of my mouth at the time, which was, uh, it was to remove medical support. After a few days and a few weeks of, kind of living in space and underwater at the same time, I was trying to get my stuff together. I was trying to figure out what to do next. And so my first list, I'm kind of a list person. It makes me feel better to write one down. My first list of all the things I needed to do was everything from my son was about to go to kindergarten and I needed to do school forms. My father was at that point still fairly healthy, but navigating an illness. And so I needed a new emergency plan for what would happen if something happened and my father became more ill again, and I needed to fly halfway across the country, either with or have plans for a 5-year-old, of which I was now the sole living parent and a sole parent of. So this was one of my first checklists, and it's really just meant to show what my brain was screaming at the time and that I really needed to get my stuff together. So what does one do? Sometimes we go to the internet and we say, what do you do when someone dies? And the kind of loneliest Google in the world led me really quickly to realize um, that we are all, or many of us, in one way or another, half of US adults don't have a will or a living will. We talk very frequently about wanting to discuss our end of life wishes, but many of us don't know how or where to start that conversation. Women in this world, heterosexually married women, live longer than their male spouses, and we often don't have the plans or the savings in place as we get older for what happens when something happens. And if you are partnered or married, and one of us lives longer than the other, which is definitely a possibility. And just so many things were screaming at me, and I realized really quickly that while my story and everyone's individual story is so unique, we all have many of the same concerns or many of the same financial or legal or medical bonfires we can all gather around and find common. common questions, concerns, and the unknown. So, a few years after my late husband died, I put together this adorable uh, little teeny website, and I launched it into the world. And the next day, it apparently had spread and spread and spread and spread. And then the New York Times called to say, can we please come out and interview you? And I quickly realized that it is also not just my story, it's all of our stories. So fast forward a handful of years, get your shit together. My original .org website, which is still around and offers resources and classes and tons of great free information and recommendations. I built another website. I wrote a book, What Matters Most, which has like hundreds and thousands of hours of blood, sweat, and tears and fantastic advice put into it, and realized that this is what and how I it is really important to me. And so again, I joked earlier that I'm not passionate about estate planning, but I am dedicated and passionate about all of us taking a minute to think about what getting our stuff together looks like and all of the ways in which estate planning or an advanced care directive is the beginning of a larger conversation. And once we have it done, who knows we have it done? Who have we shared it with, and how are they going to access it? So there are some concentric circles. And so here's a quick list of the things that kept bubbling up to the top when I got the phone call during that week in the hospital and for the weeks, months, and even years after. Steve, is
Man.
there anything that I'm missing or
Yeah, no,
you'd
this
like
is
me to jump
I
in
just
on?
wanted to pop in and just say, again, your story, just every time I hear it, it kind of just gets me thinking much more clearly. And I think you're right. I think the what I'm seeing there is that you and other people are recognizing and organizations are recognizing that the term estate planning is just like it's this prescriptive term that doesn't it's more of a financial and legal thing, and it's not the emotional aspects that you talked about in your own personal journey. And right when you started and you said that the first words out of your mouth were get your do I have my shit together? Eileen said those were the exact words that came out of my mouth 9 months ago. So
Oh,
you're right. We're not alone. And but the because we're not alone, the goal is let's share this resource so that other folks don't have to experience quite the amount of trauma that you did. Uh, I guess you're never going to eliminate that when you lose a loved one. It's you're never going to lose that aspect of it, but to add all the other complications on top of it doesn't enable us to the opportunity to properly grieve the people that we're missing.
absolutely. I could not have said it better, Steve. Thank you. Yeah, it's true. And while we all have felt the consequences or felt that aftermath of if somebody is sick or when somebody needs to transition to a different home, whether it's planned or oh no, we've got 24 hours to figure this out. um, the average amount of time it takes to what legal and financial people call winding down somebody's estate is about 200 hours. And so if you think of that, that's about a year of making a phone call every day during lunch, or instead of going to yoga, or instead of reading your kid a story, or instead of trying to get your mom to give you the spaghetti recipe that she's been coveting and won't give you for all of this time. Mom, if you're listening, I still want it. Um, yeah, and so and the thing that additionally happens is when we don't have some of these basic plans together, when we don't have a will or beneficiaries designated on our bank accounts, and I'll talk about how free and easy that is to do in a few minutes, that 200 hours can quickly double to go to 400 hours. And you know, being an executor or administrator of somebody's estate is a hard job, and many of us are already struggling through what does my life look like now, financial, emotional. I'm just for about, I'd say a solid 6 months. I was having a good day after my late husband died when I made a lunch for my kid, got him to school on time, and found pants. Really, there were some like pants days that made me feel like I was doing okay. It's all encompassing, and so getting our shit together is giving us some handholds or a rope to make those 400 to 200 hours, maybe a few dozen hours, and less digging through tubs of boxes in our basement looking for important documents and saying, oh, right, mom and I spent some time at the FedEx Kinko's making copies of things because I spent a ton of time trying to move us to a digital password manager, which she refuses to do. So, whatever it is that's going to work for you and your family, let's just give ourselves some answers in advance. So, if it's okay with you, I'd love to take a few minutes and just
Yeah, yeah,
talk
definitely. Let's
through.
go down some of these things. I saw some of this, but out of curiosity, like when your husband passed, were you working and you've got like, uh, what was your profession?
So I'm glad you asked. So one of the things that I've said is our household went from a two-income family to a none-income family overnight. And most families or individuals do not have the extensive emergency fund that many financial planners recommend. Recommending is fine, but having 6 months or more of your basic expenses, saved in a high yield savings account or something that's liquid, or old school folks used to recommend CD ladders. It's entirely unrealistic for many people. There was a study a few years ago that showed that about uh, 40% of people did not or could not have access to $400 in cash for an emergency. So we are, in some ways, my family was, I'll speak for myself, really living one accident or illness away from financial ruin. And I didn't realize the precipice I was standing on, that we were so close to the edge. So I had been a contractor. My late husband was an employee. So there were some benefits through his work that were helpful. I had, as a independent contractor, consultant, working, hopefully not at that point full time, so I could take my son to kindergarten and back, or preschool. I had no benefits. I had no vacation time, and I just wanted to call the people who I had been, working for at the time and say, I'm going to disappear for a long time, maybe forever. Sorry about all the projects that I'm not going to complete. So, so that was a long answer to your quick
No, no, I
question.
was just very interested. So the okay. Yeah, let's dive into these. I'll duck behind the curtains here again and let's dive into these. And folks, just any questions, keep on throwing them in there and we'll make sure to address them.
Okay. So, just a quick legal 101, because many people will ask me, what's the difference between a will and a living will, power of attorney versus a will? These are excellent questions. We all have them because there's no reason why any of us should have a deep understanding of estate planning documents. Um, I'm not an attorney. I'm not a financial planner, and I'm not an insurance salesperson. So one person had commented or joked that I'm kind of the Aaron Brockovich of estate planning, and I love it. So I'm running with that. Um, there are, however, three very core documents that encompass nearly every person's estate planning documents or package. And whether or not you have all of these, or a 2-page or 200-page version of them, the basic decisions and designations are going to be the same for nearly all of us. So a will document basically says who gets your stuff after you die. guardianship of children, if you are a guardian of an adult, if you have pets, people have a pet guardianship plan, which is a really great thing to do. And I recently worked with somebody who was had an extensive greenhouse, and so we had a guardianship plan for their plants. Whatever it is you have and love, it could be your Elvis tribute artist jumpsuit collection, it could be your vinyl collection, it could be jewelry, it could be your first drafts of poetry in high school, whatever they are. You would pick an executor of the will, that's the project manager or boss of the will. And after you die, they're in charge of and legally responsible, fiduciarily responsible for reviewing everything that would be in your state, your assets, for seeing what kind of legitimate debts need to get paid off, and then distributing the things that you say in your will. So your cousin Jenny gets the Elvis outfits, and Uncle Bob gets the lawnmower, and whatever it might be. A power of attorney document is something, a separate document, and you name somebody to be the power of attorney. It does not have to be the same person who is the executor of your will. And that is giving somebody the legal right to speak for you, make decisions for you, pay your rent, feed your pets, get medical access, keep things moving, not necessarily at the end of life. The will and testament document, the person who's the executor is in charge of your assets and estate after you die. Just because you name somebody an executor of your will doesn't mean they can come to your house while you're still alive and just start taking care of your stuff and bossing you around. The power of attorney document, that person gets to have legal rights to help you on your behalf up until the point you die. After a death or your death, that person who's the power of attorney ceases to have generally legal rights to access your stuff, and that's when the executor would come in. A living will or an advanced care directive are your end of life wishes, generally, for example, while you are in hospice or at the end of your life, what you do and don't want, what kind of medical care you do and don't want. And you would name a person to be your medical advocate, and that's the person who would talk to your family, who would talk to the doctors and communicate your wishes that you have talked to them about and have written down in advance. And the more direct you are, the better. And I like to think of this as a opportunity for us to tell people what we want. And in many situations, they're not delighted to do everything exactly as we say. And in these situations, we can be really clear and specific. Now, there are trusts, there are HIPAA releases, there are letters to doctors, there are many other kinds of legal documents. However, these are the foundational three documents, decisions, and designations that are really important for all of us to make, whether you are using a very simple online template specific to your state, or if you're working with an estate planning attorney or a combination of the two. So those are the basic legal things that will help make that 400 hours of winding down somebody's estate closer to 200 and getting our stuff together. My goal is to get it down to a few dozen. So that's just a super, super basic legal 101. I will say that there are, I can share this out. So there's a little more information here. A living will, there are many, 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 many different um, uh, groups and organizations. And Steve, you might have some specific referrals or recommendations about a living will. Often these documents are free. Most often, Five Wishes is an organization, and they have, look, I have my birthday on here too, so just so you know how old I am, in case you want to send me a birthday card. Um, so many are free. You can have a conversation with a doctor. You can have this conversation with your community. Steve, I imagine, you all have talks about these, but having a living will is a really important thing to have as well, because legal stuff is very, very state by state specific. And one of the things I'll say is if you don't necessarily agree with all of the state's rules and laws while you are alive, chances are you may not agree with all of their rules or laws or selection of who will speak for you, who they would name as your heir, or who they would name as the person to manage your stuff after you no longer have the chance to designate that for yourself.
Yeah, and some of these, obviously, like Five Wishes, is one that has come up many times, and the Conversation Project, but the other two I don't think have come up. So I'll make sure to add links to all of those in our recording. And let's see, Susan was asking, I don't know if you're going to get to this or if you have is she she wanted to know if you might be able to discuss how do you find somebody to be your power of attorney?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me talk for just a quick second about who to ask and how to name. So, one of the things people frequently do when they're doing their estate planning documents is they list if they have, a spouse. Often that's the first one as the primary choice on your power of attorney, your will, your living will, any of the stuff, your beneficiary designations. Um, one of the reasons to also have these documents done is to have a primary person listed and a secondary, a backup always listed, just in case your primary person isn't able, for whatever reason, let's say they're in the Grand Canyon for 2 weeks and off the grid, they aren't reachable, they aren't able to make decisions, and there's, time sensitive things that need to happen. Um, Another reason to have these document done is that the state will decide your next of kin. The next of kin gets your assets, and the next of kin is the person who's assigned your, estate administrator or the one who goes into the room to talk to the doctors or your power of attorney. Because these are important jobs, you want to ask somebody who is trusted and close or close enough to you, somebody for, let's say, a power of attorney or a will document who is okay with numbers, is okay with administrative things, maybe isn't a pushover when it comes to roadblocks and somebody saying, "Oh no, we can't do that." Um, Sometimes you would say, "Why not?" And who do I need to talk to who can do that? So a family member, a close friend. I know a number of people who have kind of these alliances like, hey, we may not be the closest, but you're my work colleague or my um, most favorite person in the book club. I don't have any family living in the state, and you don't have any family living in the state. How about we do each other the favor and be this serve this role for somebody. You can also hire somebody, a fiduciary, a professional person, either through your bank or private companies who have all of the certifications and standing to fill this role for you. And for a number of people, they're like, I don't want to ask my spouse to do all of this administrative stuff. Can I get somebody to help them and supervise? You can hire somebody. And some people choose to hire a professional to do all of that administrative stuff. And that the fees for that can come out of your estate. So who to choose, how to choose is super, super personal. It doesn't have to be your spouse. It doesn't have to be your spouse for everything. And you can look to a death doula. You can look to medical professionals. You can look for somebody who has fiduciary services to manage some of these administrative type things for you. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and our many of our one of our top topics is solo aging. Okay.
Yeah.
And this question comes up, and it's so great to hear it over and over again because there's so many folks out there that are that they may not have family that's alive still, and it's sort of figuring out who is going to take on this great responsibility and figuring that out.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think that even if it is maybe not the person who is your best possible choice. Uh, sometimes, for me, I'm making the decision between what I would ask my mother for, who is, um, older, and we're talking not actively, but, generally, passively, because she's from the Midwest. We like to talk passively about some things. who who she would like, and the things I am going to ask or designate her for in my documents are slowly transferring them to my sibling, and thinking about what my now 20-year old legal adult son, what I would want for him to be responsible for, what he might be capable of being responsible for. And, I have to say, as a widowed solo parent, I made some alliances with other solo moms or people who also might not have had a reliable spouse or ex to count on as well. So I had a very close alliance with a woman with a son who was my son's age. They were really, really close for a while. Then they really like would just throw mud at each other. And I was like, you guys have to be friends because Amy and I are each other's medical power of attorney, okay? Like
Oh, wow.
you guys can't hate each other. So I appreciated being the well, I didn't love the fact that I had to, but I appreciated the minute to step back and say, who else might be in a position? What kind of shared uh, help or support could we offer? And then it does really make uh, give you perhaps a little bit more inspiration to spend a little more time being more specific in your documents. So while Amy and I uh, were great friends and remain so, I didn't want to say, you know what I'd like, you know, quality of life is important, figure it out. So we spent more time, an hour or two, really going through what we'd want and how. So she would feel like she was communicating my directions rather than having to guess
Yeah.
what I would want.
Yeah, and I think that in some of the stories, in people that will call me, I'm thinking of one gentleman who, had an attorney sort of be his representative. And why he was calling me is like, this guy isn't returning my phone calls. It's like, I've got some questions. And it really illustrated. I said, look, I mean, there's a, you should have a decent personal relationship. Like you might have to pay somebody, to be your power of attorney. But you want to be friends with them, or at least give them periodic updates, so maybe you need to be able to meet with this attorney every 6 months and go out to lunch, and have a ground rule. When I call you, I need a return call in 48 hours. But anyways, I didn't mean to get you off track, but I wanted to make sure that we addressed that, because I know that's was a question that was going to pop up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's good too, and it's super relevant for all of the other things like your will or who you want to designate to be your digital power of attorney. For me, it's not. I have a friend who used to be a social worker in the ER. She is my medical power of attorney. Even if I get remarried, and my new spouse says I want to be your medical power of attorney, I'll say no. I love you, but Aaron is the one. Uh, Erin also doesn't even like email. There is no way I'm putting her in charge of my digital accounts because she like replies all accidentally sometimes to everything. So
So dive into that. I mean,
yeah.
I've heard a little bit about digital power of attorney, but share with us a little bit more about that, because I know that's something that a lot of people don't even think about.
Right. So if you have your will and power of attorney documents, if you'd completed them, say 5 or 10 years ago, chances are good you've never heard of digital power of attorney. Because the internet is everywhere and more and more and more of our financial accounts, our assets, whether it's art or, the 10,000 photos that we uploaded to some cloud storage somewhere, our airline miles, whatever it is, the most of us have at least a few email accounts, and some of them have gone dormant or set adrift. Most of us have dozens of some kind of online account, anything from Netflix to wherever your 401k is to your photos that you want or need somewhere. A digital power of attorney is another role you can specify, and I would highly recommend everyone does add uh, specifically digital power of attorney to your power of attorney document. And that is one more line of defense for you and your digital legacy, digital assets, and one more line of offense for the person who you've designated as your digital power of attorney to go to the company and say, hey, Facebook, I'm this person's digital power of attorney. I have legal rights and privileges for you to open or close whatever it is the account. Hi, AT&T or cell phone carrier. I'm the digital power of attorney. I have legal right to be able to access, turn off or on, or whatever it is somebody's account, because the main issue and the main problem has been our digital assets haven't really caught up to the previous view or definition of like our analog assets. So the lamp in your house is obviously an asset that you own. What about the art that you made that's online? Who really owns that? So people had been having a lot of trouble accessing other people's online accounts. And that could be anything from, airline miles that you don't get to use to really heart-wrenching stories about uh, not being able to find pictures or not being able to previously turn on or off somebody's Facebook account. And so you keep getting those like, remember 4 years ago, and you're like, I don't want Facebook to send me a picture of my dead husband when I'm just trying to get through the day. Stop at
Wow.
Facebook.
I never thought about that because, yeah, I mean, right now I kind of like that. Look at the kids and it's, oh, this was 10 years ago, but I can imagine depending on how somebody grieves. I mean, it could be something that is memorable, but I can see where a lot of us, at least the first few years, would be devastating.
It can be, or you just want to be able to have yourself the agency and like the efficiency of having your digital life assets accounts not be something you have to bang your head against the wall every day. So I do encourage using a password manager, and if you don't like password managers, having some other kind of system to keep track of where your most important accounts are. um, and that also can really help down the line when somebody who is your executor or power of attorney, where and how, where is your stuff? Where is your bank accounts? Where do you get your prescriptions filled? So there really is this kind of digital forensics or sleuthing, or sometimes if we don't have or if or when we or somebody else doesn't have our most important digital accounts organized or at least written down, sometimes that can be because it'll take you, hours of time to find it, track it down, and get access to. Or it can be really devastating if some things are never found that are really important, whether they're financial or emotional, valuable items. So kind of corralling your details. And I have one quick slide I can talk about that if we have
Yeah, no, let's get
two
back on
minutes.
there. I know that this could be an all-day discussion. And one cool thing before we leave, you actually do workshops, like 6-week workshops and one-on-one consulting. So this is just a brief overview, folks, but we'll make sure to share the links to that so that if you want to dive more into this with Chanel, you can.
Thank you. I do. And I love doing 6-week classes every quarter. I also have a self-study course, which is a little easier for people to watch whenever they want. So money, just one quick note on money. Similar to the digital assets conversation we were just talking about, where are your accounts? How easy is it for you to have access to them? Are they co-owned or individually owned? And then who is the beneficiary? One great estate planning hack is to make sure your beneficiary designations on all of your financial accounts. So I'm talking your checking and savings account that has $5 in it, your life insurance policy, if you have one, your pension, if you're able to name a beneficiary on it, any of your investments, anything that, has, stocks, any kind of financial account offers something called a beneficiary. And when you have a beneficiary designated, that money is considered to be transferred on death or payable on death. So that payable on death or transfer on death, those funds are much more immediately and quickly transferred to that person. So they don't end up in the clump of things that are your assets that are subject to probate that can take sometimes months, if not a year or two, to manage. So the other thing about beneficiary designations is in every single class and every single quarter, I've offered to give the person who doesn't have a thing $100. Like I will give whoever, if I have a class and everyone does their beneficiary audit and review, if somebody if nobody says, oh my God, my ex-partner was on that, or I set up this bank account 20 years ago and my sister's still on it and she's been dead for 10 years. So you really don't want someone to get your money who you don't want to get your money because beneficiary designations on your financial accounts beat or trump the will. If you wrote your sister who you don't speak to anymore, if you listed her as a beneficiary 20 years ago, and you spend now $5,000 writing the most beautiful, complete, extensive will, the beneficiary designation trumps the will. So that's a super important thing. So beneficiaries, like in real estate. Real estate is location, location, location. Estate planning, beneficiaries, beneficiaries, beneficiaries. And then, when it comes to emergency funds, I do my best to keep a healthy one so I don't find myself in the spot again, especially as a solo parent or as a solo person or somebody who needs to be able to have a plan and be able to afford an airline ticket to go see my parents who don't live in my state immediately. So, what if something were to happen? What would you do now if it was, for the next 24, 48 hours? If something were to happen and it's going to keep happening, what kind of planning might you have in place? Or, oh, okay, I've got this other thing I can cash out. And then long term, of course, we cannot plan for every single edge case and contingency, but just having a little bit of a what happens if something happens. So you have an answer or two when you are in the place where you don't want to be thinking about it for the first time. Um, I'd be happy to talk more about insurance. It's like estate planning, a super sexy conversation to have, but an important one nonetheless. And then I do want to just say this is one of my favorite Star Wars things. So those were the droids you're looking for. I'm a total sci-fi nerd, but I do just think of this poor stormtrooper having to go back to whoever saying, oh, I let them go. So details, somebody asked about details, and I do have a really extensive kind of details wrangler spreadsheet I'd be happy to share. It's normally part of the class, but Steve reminded me to get a link to you because if something happens and you need that information right away, you want to have names and phone numbers or addresses. And a little bit of an annual review, I like to say, of your accounts. Like, oh, I have a new phone number, or we got new keys to the house, or my online accounts have changed, or I've updated my policies, just so you have a little bit of a roundup of those important things. So if and when you need them, specifically if you need them in a hurry, you know where to find them. And if or when you are planning in advance, your executor of your will or your financial power of attorney is going to want to know this stuff as well. So whether it's now, oh shit, or here is the packet of information so you don't have to spend an extra 100 hours digging through all of my emails trying to find stuff. Emergency plans, I'd be happy to have a longer conversation about password managers. I use one. I think they're a good idea. Some people aren't comfortable with that, so there's some other ways to do it. But in the end, I just love this. So it's a picture of somebody in a therapist's office with someone very Freud looking, and the supposedly parent saying to the child is, someday all this will be yours. So whatever it is we're going to be leaving, this looks like more of an emotional thing, but whatever it is we're going to leave, we can try to, apparently I have a Freud thing, think about what some of these what if scenarios are and just plan for a few of them. Like one of the biggest reasons why people say they don't do this is because they're already overwhelmed. They don't know where to start. They don't want to do the wrong thing. And of course, none of us want to do that. So I like to kind of start with putting a stake in the ground about what's most important to me in my life right now. So if something happened, and my two scenarios that are the most important ones to me are like, what if something happened to me? And as a solo parent, what plans do I have in place for my son to always be okay? What if something happened and about a year and a half ago, my father, who had been navigating long illness, he had a few documents in place. He did not enjoy talking about an advanced care directive with me, but when it came to a do not intubate and a do not resuscitate, he was like, give me the documents. So those were really important mile markers for us to know what he wanted and where his line was. So my second scenario is what would happen if something happened to my father. And when it did, um, we didn't have everything perfect. Nobody lives on perfect island. If we did, it doesn't sound like a fun place to live anyway. But we had what we needed to know what to do next. Even if that wasn't what we wanted, we knew what he did. And now it's, my mom and I are now widows, so that's a funny joke. Like we haven't gotten sweatshirts, but hopefully we still have time. And I never even thought of it before. But what would happen if something happened to her? And my brother and I don't have every single contingency plan from zombie apocalypse to, spaceships landing figured out, but we have some. And so we just know what to do next. And so that is what I would encourage all of you to do is don't get overwhelmed because it's already overwhelming. And then you just, turn off the computer and watch cat videos online, which is a perfectly acceptable way to spend your time. But just what would happen if something happened and what's the most important thing to do? And then spend 5 minutes today or this week figuring out what you would want to have for yourself or others and just take it, eat that elephant off your chest one bite or five
Yeah.
minutes at a time.
Well, this is great, and I love that the fact that and we've got some great attorneys in our community, but
Awesome.
I like hearing this, number one, your personal story, and number two, it being explained by a layperson that has gone through it. And I know we've got some questions and we're going to get to it, but before I want to remind everybody this is recorded if you have to jump off, but I wanted to make sure to throw your website up there because folks, on the website you'll see you can get a lot of great information, but if you click on, you can buy the book, but you can Chanel has these classes and workshops. You can see there's a 6-week master course, looks like that is in already started. And then you've got weekend workshops and you've got the do it yourself. But then you could do a private one-on-one with Chanel and sort of brainstorm some of the scenarios and the feelings that you're faced with. So I'm going to make sure drop your website in there. It'll be on the recording, but you want to try to jump in on some of these questions here and and we'll go for a few minutes if that's okay, if you can hang on for a little bit.
Absolutely. I can
All
talk about
right,
this all
let's.
day.
Okay, so Adele, she says, I have a will and a trust and a what is it? Advanced medical directive. Um, but I'm not sure if I have my shit together. I don't like thinking about it. Um, the Adele, I think the fact that you've done that much, those are some key elements on Chanel's list. Yeah, I think you're more prepared than a lot of us out there. Oh, this is a good one. If someone is a POA, can't they access the digital? If somebody is your power of attorney, can't they access the digital?
Uh, Technically, yes, they can. However, um, if you specifically name digital power of attorney, then that adds that extra layer of specificity about your digital assets, specifically to companies who say we have a, you know, we have an agreement with the person who set up the account, and the terms and conditions say we can't give our stuff to anyone after they die or their heirs. So while our assets are considered assets, the digital landscape has been really extra hard and troubling and challenging for people. So adding the digital power of attorney gives your person that extra layer of legal protection and legal specificity to say, no, actually, you have to hand over the whatever it is. So until the federal or state rules and laws catch up to the more standard or long-standing um, definition of assets, many people recommend, and I recommend just adding that in so they have, another key or tool in their toolbox to advocate for you.
Now, a lot of times people will say to me, it's like, oh, I talked to a bunch of estate planning or elder law attorneys, and man, it's expensive. And and oftentimes what I tell them is, well, one way that number one, tell the one that you like the most that you feel that this is expensive. See what their response is. Because a lot of the attorneys that I've met with will say, well, here's how we could do it more affordably if you do X, Y, and Z. But one of the things that I've heard, and one of the things that I could see is that if you consulted with Chanel or took her workshop and got all of your items organized and thought about all the different scenarios and you've got your beneficiaries lined up, you're basically now able to go to an attorney with your ducks in a row. So it's more of a process and less of a cost um, burden. Would you say that's a correct assumption?
I would. So I can absolutely assure you that the cost of the self-study class or the 6-week class is less than any hourly rate from pretty much any attorney you might find out there. And so my goal in the class and what's successful once you get to the end of the class is to have your questions answered, you know where to go next, you might know what challenges you face, and you'll have a questionnaire or a spreadsheet with everything that, your main decisions and designations already figured out in advance. And what I've discovered over the last few years is that generally will save nearly everyone an hour or two of conversation and back and forth with an attorney that could cost a lot of money. Um, Absolutely.
And
And
and in general, I've found the attorneys like that. I mean, they are not like we had a digital platform called Audio where people type in all their information, and in general, most attorneys are like, "Hey, this is great because I don't want to be charging somebody for having a little conversation here for an hour or two, you know."
exactly. Now, one thing that a number of attorneys and ones I've worked with and collaborated with and respect have said is, it's their job to make sure that your will is not only legally binding, but it's comprehensive and complete. So many attorneys will get your package of here's what I want, here are the names of the people, I have the addresses ready, here's who I want to be my power of attorney and my backup. Here's all of the information I have, here are my 5 questions. and here are my concerns because I have property out of state. What would you recommend? They'll likely want to review, everything to make sure that you're not forgetting about a business, that you're not forgetting about pet guardianship, that you're not forgetting about some other thing, which is appropriate and helpful because you want it to be legally binding and accurate and correct, but you also want it to be as comprehensive as possible. One thing I would also recommend is, when folks talk to an attorney, if you are considering working with one or want to switch to whoever you were working with in the past, or you moved out of state, you can almost always get a free consultation. Sometimes it's 15 minutes, sometimes it's 20 or 30 minutes. But in that amount of time, especially if you have some sense for, here's generally what my assets are. I don't have any complications. What would you recommend, and how does your fee structure work? What might be the ways that we can make, a $3,000 will or estate planning package a $1,000 will? And and most attorneys, Steve, to your point, aren't counselors or therapists or social workers, and they, to differing degrees of comfort and skill, are able to talk about, navigating a conversation with your sister. Like some of them are like really don't want to have that conversation with you at all, or nor are perhaps very good at it. So ask them about, what you need. Maybe that attorney's right for you. Ask them about their fee, and then ask them, like, how do we get creative so this can be more affordable and I don't have to waste your time asking questions that you don't want to answer because I've already figured some of that stuff out.
Man, this is great. Okay, so Mary has a question. How does one know when they should set up a trust? And I know we could probably have a full hour presentation on that, but is that more of a financial kind of element with trusts, or how do you help people with that decision?
Yeah, so again, not an attorney. However, there are a few kind of flags or check marks that might indicate that a trust is going to be better for you. One, if you live in California, California has been notoriously complicated for estate planning and getting divorced, as far as I understand. So if you live in California and you have any property, especially any real estate property or property, a trust might, is often a route people take to make it easier rather than harder. Currently, the rules and laws federally, excuse me, are if uh, estate tax, or like an inheritance tax, death tax, the way we talk about it, if somebody has assets that are more than $12 million currently, that triggers um, some tax situation. And so anybody who individually owns around $12 million in property or assets or more, or if you're legally married, 24 million, which sounds like a lot. And for most of us, for me, it is. But if you have a lot of property, or hit that current threshold of 12 or 24, a trust is probably most definitely a thing that an attorney or a financial planner would recommend for you. Now that threshold is scheduled to decrease to more like $2 or $3 million in 2025. And so that the difference between people who have, maybe $3 million in property and 12 million, I think that's a lot of people. And in fact, I was working with a couple recently, and they said, "Oh, we don't have anywhere near that kind of assets." And um, the partner said to the other, like, "Oh, but doesn't your mom have that brownstone that she's gonna give to you?" And I was like, "Brownstone in Brooklyn, like lawyer up right now.
Yeah.
Like you guys want to figure out how to make that work well." So
Um,
so trusts are also some things. Last thing I'll say is that people will set up if they just want a little bit more guardrails around the what and the how of how you would distribute assets to somebody. You have caregiving responsibilities. You want your 20-year-old son to not get a check for $1 million for a life insurance policy and then go to Vegas, right? Like I would like to set up some rules around that and some supervision. And trusts are not for land barons anymore. They also are a little, they can be less complicated than what we might imagine them to be, and they can save time and money in the years to come.
Great. Okay, there's some really good comments in chat there that everybody can read, and I'll have that on the recording. I just looked at the clock, and by no surprise, I knew this was going to go long today. This has been wonderful. Susan, I agree. She says excellent presentation. Thanks for sharing your story, and I really do believe, Chanel, like your story is what makes your advice so practical, is because you were willing to be transparent about what happened to you and share that with us. It just has so much more meaning than that. The okay, here's elder care planning 101. Folks, this has been great. Thanks everybody for your participation. And Chanel, I'll be in touch with you. We'll definitely have you back on. Maybe we can dive into some things deeper or what have you.
I'd love that. Thank you so much. And I'm happy to share the um, PowerPoint and any other resources that would be helpful. And if anyone has questions, just reach out via the website. I'm happy to chat and
You
help
got
if
it.
I can.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.